All right, guys. Today we are going to be reacting to everything wrong with the black community in 12 minutes. Thomas Sowell Reacts. Let's jump in.
For the most, as I read this book, for the most part, it's objective. It's objective throughout. It's calm. It's analytical. But when you take on this modern progressive position that racism accounts for anything, there are passages in which you're angry. I felt that there are passages in which there's emotion that is very close to this. So let me just read a little bit to you. Median black family income has been lower than median white family income for generations. But the median per capita income of Asian groups is more than $15,000 a year higher than the median per capita income of white Americans. Is this the white supremacy we're so often warned about? For more than a quarter of a century, in no year has the annual poverty rate of black married couple families been as high as 10%. And in no year has the poverty rate of Americans as a whole been as low as 10%. If black poverty is caused by systemic racism, do racists make an exception for blacks who are married?
Good point. Good point. Good observation as well from the great Thomas Sowell. Now, the argument that they can implement is, well, the marriage institution is a white supremacist institution system. That's part of the white supremacy. You can say that. Now, that means you have to do the same argument to all the other demographics. All different demographics. You have to say the same argument. Now, if that's not the case, what is it that is making black families to be in a position of poverty even more than the 1950s? Make no sense.
I guess you're allowed to be angry.
Yes. Well, yes.
So, do you have the feeling when you're addressing this notion that racism accounts for everything, do you have the feeling that that the arguments are subtle, it's persuasive, you can forgive someone for buying that argument? Or do you have the feeling that it's willful, that the case is so clearly mistaken that there's a willfulness about it?
No, I don't. I think that people don't look for certain evidence, and therefore they don't find it. And so, on the basis of what they know at a given time, this may be very plausible. The problem is that what you really need are other people with different orientation who are skeptical and who will then look for things and find things that are very different from that. One of the things that I found interesting was the fact that there are various counties in the United States which are among the poorest counties in the country.
And they're white.
And 6 of those counties have a population that ranges from 90% white to 100% white.
Appalachian counties.
Yeah.
Kentucky.
Yeah.
Appalachian County, West Virginia, Tennessee, all that region, Kentucky, they are kind of poor. Even in their South, there's a lot of poor white people.
In Ohio, as I recall.
Yeah, but mainly it's the hillbilly communities. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, there's that great book that was written, The Hillbilly Elegy. It was on the bestseller list for more than a year consecutively.
I need to buy that book.
Yes.
I need to buy that book.
These are people who have faced zero racism.
They are white.
And they are white and zero racism.
They're white and they're from the Germanic regions, such as Germany, Dutch, Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria. Even I'm gonna even put there like Swedish and Nordic Europeans. They just they're probably the lowest of the lowest. That's what I think. When a lot of immigrants from Europe they moved to the United States, a lot of them were just basically like the lowest of the lowest. Because if you're doing so well in Europe, why would you move to the United States? That's my opinion.
Also, back in the 30s, when they did IQ studies, their IQs were not only at the same level as those of blacks, they had the same pattern, namely that the young people, whether they were black or hillbilly would have an IQ very close to the national average
That's the
at
interesting.
age 6. But by the time they were teenagers, it just kept going down and down and down.
Wow.
Because it's relative to the other people of that age group, and they simply were falling behind. So it was
Wow.
clearly not biological; it was social. But despite that, these hillbilly counties had incomes that were not only lower than the national average, they were lower than the average of black incomes
Wow.
for a period of half a century. It may have been longer than that because I only went through half a century. But in every study that was done over that half century, they scored lower, their family incomes were lower than the family incomes of blacks. So obviously there must be other things that cause people to be poor other than racism.
All right. People in low-income American hillbilly counties already face zero racism because they are virtually all white.
Yes.
Yet they have lower incomes than blacks, just as you were saying. In other words, some behavior patterns seem to pay off. Now, this book is dedicated to fallacies, to showing errors in premises and errors in analysis. It's not dedicated to an alternative explanation. Nevertheless, you've got this argument lurking in here that it's the way people live, it's the way cultural patterns. So what are the patterns that pay off?
Well, oh my heavens, that's a much larger book than this.
Well, you've got time on your hands.
In terms of public policy, what does not pay off is having charismatic leaders depending upon government to do things. Because if you look what has happened to blacks before and after, there was a massive government effort on their behalf.
They messed up.
The poverty rate among blacks, if you start in 1940 instead of 1960, because 1960 is the magic number for people who are saying the government, you see, did all these wonderful things and blacks advanced because of it. In 1940, the black poverty rate was 87%. By 1960, it was down to 47%.
That's dramatic.
But from 1960 to 1970, it went down to 30%. And in 1970, affirmative action was now in place. It went down to 29%. So in the 20 years prior to 1960s, the black poverty rate went down by 40 points, and in the 20 years after 1960, it went down by 18 points. But again, you have the same thing you had with what was the Ralph Nader effect. You see,
You started in 1960. You missed this.
So, you miss all of that.
So you've got in this book. This is a point you make again and again in the section on racial fallacies. That I started thinking of it. I don't think you use these terms, but this is not an original thought with me. I started thinking of it as a hidden century of black progress.
Yes.
From emancipation with the end of the Civil War through to 1965, let's say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 65, through the mid-60s. You've got a century, and you argue black educational attainment rises.
Yes.
Black poverty rate drops dramatically.
Yeah.
And these are people who started with no property, overwhelmingly illiterate. This is from the moment, the year zero in 1865 for African Americans. And they climb, and the other point that you make at a number of places is that the black family is overwhelmingly intact.
Yes.
Right up to 1960, most black, go ahead, explain that.
And not only do people take credit for things that were not their doing, they overlook the negative things that came in after the 1960s as a result of policy. In 1940, 17% of black children were raised in single-parent homes.
That's crazy, man. That's insane. Man, that even let me just go back. Like
18% of black in 1940, 17%.
17%, folks. 17%. It basically flipped. Now it's almost 73%, right? 73, 75, 70. It all depends where you get your sources. Some sources even have it up to 80%. And you can see it. You don't have to really go to the statistics. You can simply see it. The majority of black kids are being born in a single parent household, and is that clearly has I will not say manipulate, but mostly um, how can I say this? Like that has give the future of the black community a disadvantage to go to the world because they're highly emotional currently. You cannot look them a different way because they might think that you're looking at them in the wrong way. They get agitated. And you can see a lot of these podcasts. You can see them. They all act like women. A lot of them. And not mean like they look like women, just over emotional. And that's a huge problem. It's a steep hill to climb, folks. But we have to confront this. We have to.
Of black children were raised in single parent homes.
17%.
17. At the end, I forget the exact date in the 20th century, but after these wonderful reforms were put in, that quadrupled to 68% of black children were being raised in single parent homes.
Wow.
Now, there's a whole literature on all the bad things that happen to kids who are raised by single parents, whether they are black or white, American or British. The studies show the same things.
Wow.
One study said that fatherlessness has a bigger effect than even race and poverty. And certainly I think back in my own life, I realized how fortunate I was, because even though my biological father died before I was born, I was adopted. I was adopted into a family where I was the only child in a family of 4 adults. And these were not people who were out having an active social life someplace. The life was there in the home.
They gave you their time.
Yes, yes. And I remember years later when I became a parent, and like other new parents, I wanted to know, when is a kid supposed to do this, when he's supposed to do that.
When do they walk?
And I said, how old was I when I started to walk? And the lone surviving member of the family that raised me said, Tommy, nobody knows when you could walk. Somebody was always carrying you. But
so you had 4 adults doting on you.
yes, and that's what and then part of the rise of blacks before was because of things that were done by blacks. Example that I think of a lot was a kid who grew up in Harlem at the same time I did. We were in the same school, lived 2 blocks from me. And we met many years later by accident on a street in San Francisco, and we talked about the old times. And one of the things he mentioned to me, because he had gone on, he was making more money than I was, and he would become wealthy, and he lived overseas with servants, and he came back and moved out to the wine country and all that stuff. But one of the things that struck me, he said that he could remember times when he was growing up when his father would sit at the dinner table watching the children eat and not eat anything himself.
Wow.
Now, it's not...
Oh, man, that's wow, man. That really hits hard, bro. Wow. Never been easy in the United States. It's never been easy in the United States. Ah, that really hit home.
It's not. That's what.
And now the father isn't even there.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So those kinds of things are what do it.
Right.
The greatest danger to the liberal vision are facts about the consequences of liberalism itself and the laws, policies, and ways of life that the left has spawned. that the black family, which survived centuries of slavery and generations of discrimination, has disintegrated in the wake of the liberal welfare states is only one example. It's interesting when you really realize that the principles espoused by Thomas Sowell are for the growth and the success of the individual. Meanwhile, the liberals and the left pride themselves in grouping people as a whole into groups so that they can avoid every form of individual or personal accountability.
Yeah.
It's easy for a lazy black person to say, well, blacks as a whole are being discriminated. But if you ask them what has been your personal experience
They don't
of
know.
discrimination that has kept you where you are, then it gets a little bit more complicated. But you let me know what you think about this in the comments below.
Very good video. Very good video, man. That story really hit home, man. Okay. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I would love to hear you guys' opinion. I'll see you in the next one.